Bang bang. I am going to talk about a very terrifying experience I had when I was little. At the time, I was an elementary school student, living with my younger sister, older sister, and mother in a small, ordinary apartment. At night, we always slept together, lining up our pillows on the tatama floor. One night, my mother wasn't feeling well, and she asked me to turn off the lights. I turned off the lights in the washroom and living room, turned off the TV, and then went to the tatami room. After telling my mother that all the lights in the house were off, I slipped into my own futon. My younger sister was already asleep beside me, since it was much earlier than usual for me. To go to bed, I couldn't fall asleep easily, and stared blankly at the ceiling for a while. Then suddenly, in the silent room, a strange bon shondekuld. I bolted upright from my futon and looked around. Bang bang. A little later, the same sound was heard again. It seemed to have come from the living room. My older sister, who was next to me, asked, "Did you hear that?" It wasn't my imagination. I looked around the room once more, but only my sister and mother were sleeping. There was nothing else in the room. Something's wrong. It was definitely a metallic sound, and it sounded quite close. My sister also seemed bothered by the sound and said she would go check the living room. I left the bedroom with my sister and stepped into the pitch-black living room. We quietly looked into the living room from near the kitchen, and there we saw it, the table in the center of the living room, the place where we always ate meals and relaxed as a family. A person was sitting on that table. Since they had their back to us, we couldn't see their face, but from the long hair that reached her waist, her slender build, and the white yukata-like kimono she was wearing, we knew it was a woman. I looked at my sister, horrified. My sister didn't even notice my gaze and was completely fixated on the woman. The woman was sitting upright, seemingly in the seiza, formal kneeling position, on the table in the pitch-dark living room, not moving a muscle. I was trembling uncontrollably from the fear. I must not make a sound or something terrible will happen. The woman showed no sign of turning around, simply sitting seiza and showing us her white back. Finally, I couldn't bear it anymore. I screamed something like, "Wah!" and jumped into the bedroom. I woke my mother up, crying and wailing, "There's a person in the living room. What's wrong?" In the middle of the night, I pulled my mother and dragged her into the living room. When we turned on the living room light, my sister was standing next to the table. The woman was nowhere to be seen. The table was neatly cleared, and nothing was on it. However, my sister's eyes were vacant. Even now, I clearly remember the expression on her face. Unlike me, she showed no sign of fear, just staring intently at the table. When my mother asked my sister what happened, she only said, "There was a woman there." My mother looked at the table with a puzzled expression but just said, "Go to sleep." And the three of us returned to the bedroom. I thought about it in my futon. In that short time, after I screamed, went to the bedroom, woke up my mother, and brought her to the living room, had my sister been watching it the whole time in the living room? My sister's behavior wasn't normal. Had she seen something terrifying? I thought. The next day, I asked my sister about it. "Hey, sis, about last night." She didn't answer. She just looked down and remained silent. I pressed her with questions. Then, in a small voice, my sister muttered, "Because you made a loud noise." Since then, my sister became cold toward me. She used to respond cheerfully whenever I spoke to her, but now she often ignored me, and we never spoke of that incident again. At that moment, the loud noise I made must have caused the woman to turn around toward my sister. My sister must have made eye contact with the woman. She must have seen something unimaginably terrifying. I was convinced of this, but as time passed, I gradually forgot about it. I started middle school and became a student preparing for exams, so I would routinely study in my room until late at night. My sister had gone to a high school outside the prefecture, lived in a dorm, and rarely came home. One night, as I was working late at my desk, I heard a sound from the door that was not a knock. Bang, bang. It sounded again, the exact same metallic sound from behind the door. I finally became so scared that I banged on my sister's room wall and yelled, "Hey, wake up!" However, my sister must have been asleep. as there was no reaction. My mother has been going to bed early recently. That means I'm the only one in the house who's noticed this sound. I felt like I was the only one left behind. It was a very faint sound, a metallic sound. When I remembered what it was, a cold sweat immediately broke out all over my body. This is it. The same sound from when my mother had a cold. When I was little and I turned off the lights instead. Bang, bang. And then the sound came again. Bang, bang. I finally realized where the sound was coming from. I quietly opened the door to my room. The living room lay beyond the short, dark hallway. It was dimly lit by the pale light of the street lamps leaking through the curtains. Bang, bang. This time, it clearly came from the woman. At that moment, I let out a sound. I don't remember what I said, but I spoke out again. Then the woman turned and looked at me. The moment I faced the woman's face, I thought I would lose my mind. In both of the woman's eyes, there was an iron nail stuck, perfectly sized to fit inside the eye sockets. Looking closely, she was gripping something like a blunt weapon in both hands. And she laughed with only her mouth and said, "You too. Your family too is finished. Fufufu." The next day, I woke up in my own bed in my room. I remembered what happened yesterday shortly after, and I asked my mother if she had carried me from the living room to my room, but she asked what I was talking about. My sister said the same, laughing and saying, "You must have been half asleep or something." Moreover, she said that when I banged on her wall, she was already sound asleep. That can't be right. I definitely saw it in the living room and must have lost consciousness there. The only explanation is that someone found me collapsed in the living room and carried me to bed. But when I tried to remember again, my head felt foggy. However, I clearly remembered that final grotesque expression and the words that came from her grinning mouth, that my family and I were finished. The strangeness began that very evening. It happened when I returned home from school in the evening and opened the front door. Usually, my mother would be in the living room preparing dinner in the kitchen, but the living room was pitch black. The light was off. "Mom, where are you?" I called out from the entrance, but the house was deadly silent, with no sign of a person. The key was unlocked. Did she forget to lock up and go shopping? Since my mother is carefree, this occasionally happens. Just as I was thinking, "Oh well," and taking off my shoes to step inside, bang, bang. I heard a sound from the living room. I felt as if all the blood in my body had instantly frozen. That exact same sound from a few years ago, and from yesterday. No, I can't stay here any longer. The instinct of terror drowned out my reason. I violently opened the door and desperately ran down the apartment stairs. What on earth happened? Where is Mom? Where is my sister? I tried to forget that sound by thinking about my family. If I thought about it any longer, I felt like I would go insane. After running and running down the completely dark alley, I ended up at a nearby supermarket. Mom must be shopping here, I muttered to myself, regaining my breath as I went inside. Since it was the time of day there weren't many people in the store. There were people who looked like middle school students my age, and what looked like housewives shopping for dinner ingredients. Seeing this perfectly normal scene, my mood calmed down a bit, and I thought about what had just happened at home. The pitch-black living room, the unlocked door, and that metallic sound. No one should have been inside the house, except for it. The strange silence of the house when I called for my mother at the front door. A person couldn't possibly be there in that state. But what if someone was? I only went as far as the entrance, so I didn't get a good look inside. The light was just off. Maybe my mother was sleeping in one of the rooms and just didn't hear my voice. I wanted to check somehow. Thinking this, I decided to call the house. The public phone beside the supermarket. I put in money and carefully pressed the number with trembling fingers. My hand holding the receiver wouldn't stop shaking. Once, twice, 3 times, the ringing echoed deep in my head. Click. Someone picked up the phone. I held my breath. An unbearable moment. "Hello? Who is this?" The voice was my mother's. Hearing that calm voice, I felt a slight relief. "Hello, Mom." "Oh, what's wrong? You're quite late today, aren't you? Did something happen?" My hand started to tremble again. Not just my hand. My legs were shaking uncontrollably. I could barely stand. It was too strange. Even in my panic, I realized this abnormality. Why? Mom! Huh? Why what? Wait, are you okay? What really happened? My mother shouldn't have been able to answer the phone right now. The phone in my house is only in the living room. The one in the living room earlier wasn't my mother. It was that monster. So why is this person answering the phone so calmly and saying I was quite late today, as if she had been home the whole time? I couldn't help but feel that the person talking to me so casually on the other end of the phone was something unknown. And the voice I finally managed to squeeze out from my dry mouth was this. Who are you? Huh? Who? After a slight pause, the answer came. I'm your mother. Fufufu. Subsequently, I am the person who previously posted the story about Ken on this thread. Nearly 8 years have passed since then. I have had another terrifying experience, which I would like to share with everyone. My writing may be clumsy, and it might be a little hard to follow for those who haven't read the previous post, but please bear with me. Currently, my mother and younger sister live in my family's apartment. My older sister, who is 2 years older, is working far from home and rarely comes back, and I live alone while attending university in a neighboring prefecture. My father is away on a solo assignment, still moving around the country, just as he was 8 years ago. Last winter, I finally heard from my family. My mother told me, "Come back home." I absolutely hated going back home. I didn't want to spend my precious holiday in that horrifying place, so I had stubbornly refused my mother's invitations every year. However, this year, my sister and father, who rarely come back, were also returning. Pushed by my mother's angry voice, I reluctantly decided to go home, even with my graduation thesis looming. I had strong reservations about returning to the house where I had such a terrible experience, but actually, there was something even scarier. I apologized to my mother, but I was most afraid of facing her. I still remember that moment when I spoke to her on the phone, and my mother was clearly acting strangely. That moment when I was talking to something that sounded like my mother, but wasn't. I can't forget it even now. Nevertheless, it's all in the past. Even after seeing it, nothing particularly strange happened around me. Fortunately, no one in my family became sick or was injured. My sister and my younger sister seemed fine, and my mother and father hadn't changed in the last 8 years. I was beginning to think that maybe that curse, "Your family is finished," and even the woman in the white kimono, was all just a dream. I was sure I would eventually forget that unpleasant sound ingrained in my ears. It'll definitely be okay, I told myself firmly as I headed home. I was determined to act cheerful while I was home, so my mother wouldn't realize the real reason I had been avoiding returning. When I got home, I felt relieved. My father, mother, younger sister, and older sister all seemed fine. Seeing me return after a long time, they gave me the usual annoying advice like, "Will you graduate okay?" And, "Do you have a boyfriend yet?" My mother, who I had been so worried about, showed no change and said she was busy with her part-time hotel cleaning job. However, talking to my older sister felt awkward and I hesitated. The reason was that my sister had completely ignored me for 8 years since the incident 8 years ago. My loud scream in the pitch-black living room when we were little must have been the trigger for the breakdown in our relationship, and my sister's coldness towards me was extraordinary. I couldn't believe the words my sister spoke while at home. "I'm sorry for ignoring you all this time." I never expected an apology from my sister, who had ignored me for 8 long years. "I'm sorry too, but what's wrong all of a sudden? Did something happen, perhaps?" I was so surprised that I felt like I had asked something I shouldn't have. My sister wore a somewhat awkward expression, but she invited me to the room we used to share and told me her story. I heard that sound at my place. Just hearing the words, that sound, made me feel something cold run down my spine. My sister noticed my reaction and continued her story. That day, I got home from work around 9 p.m. I was watching TV in my room, and I heard Can from the direction of the bathroom. I immediately knew what it was because I had heard that sound with you when we were kids. This is bad, I thought. A coworker lived nearby, so I immediately left the house and went to her place. As I was talking with her, I heard ban again from the direction of the bathroom. It was a strange metallic sound. My friend and I panicked, left the room and called the police. In the end, there was nothing in the bathroom, and they checked the room too, but found nothing. My sister's story completely resurrected the cursed memories of 8 years ago. I can't forget what happened then. Even now, the pitch-black living room, the woman sitting on the table, the metallic can sound, the woman turning around, the grotesque face. That sound, which appeared without any warning, was so horrifying that it gave me a severe metallic sound phobia for a while. In places with music, I would be on edge, worrying if I'd hear a cowbell or a bell-like sound. I would cover my ears and tremble at the metallic sounds of frying pans and pots in the kitchen. When traveling far, I had to avoid roads with railroad crossings, otherwise I couldn't move easily. However, there were a few differences in my sister's story compared to 8 years ago. She hadn't seen the woman in the white kimono, nor had she heard a voice, only that uncanny ban sound. Moreover, the location was the bathroom. I knew it was sitting Siza on the living room table, but the bathroom? Was it really the same thing? Just as I was about to ask my sister, she suddenly started crying, with tears streaming down her face. I panicked and tried to soothe her, saying, "It's not certain that it was it." Then, with a tear-stained face, my sister glared at me and pressed me with a formidable voice. "Haven't you heard about Mom from Mika, my sister's name? About Mom? From my sister?" I was confused, unable to see where the conversation was going. Just a moment ago, I had enjoyed the delicious beef stew my mother made. Nothing seemed strange about my mother, and my younger sister seemed normal, too. To my anxious face, my older sister said, wiping her tears, "She sometimes sneaks out of the house in the middle of the night. Ask Mika for the details." Hearing my older sister's unusual story, I immediately went to my younger sister's room and questioned her. "What do you mean Mom goes out at night?" "Ah, you heard from Sis, right? It's true. Want to see together." That night, I was allowed into my younger sister's room. I laid out a futon next to her bed, and we waited for time to pass while staring blankly at the ceiling. My younger sister said that my mother usually leaves the house around the same time, a little after 1 a.m., and returns in about 10 minutes. When she first noticed her mother's absence, my younger sister thought she was just going outside for a smoke to relax, so she hadn't paid much attention and had gone back to sleep. However, her mother's outings continued even when it got cold enough for snow. When she asked her mother about it, the reaction was, "What are you talking about?" She didn't seem to be feigning ignorance. She seemed to have absolutely no memory of going out late at night herself. Suspicious, my younger sister secretly followed her mother. "It'll be soon now." When my younger sister said that, I listened closely. Soon after, I felt a person's presence in the hallway, separated by a single door. Gassa sounds could be heard near the entrance. I assumed she was putting on her boots. Then, with a key sound, came coke footsteps. She was definitely outside now. My younger sister and I exchanged glances, quietly opened the door to make as little noise as possible, and tiptoed to the entrance. The door was unlocked. My younger sister carefully gripped the doorknob and softly opened the door. The dark alley. We only had the street lamp and the moonlight to rely on. When I asked my younger sister where Mom went, she was surprised to say she was very close by. A bad feeling slowly crept over me. My mother was about 100 meters from the house, under the street lamp illuminating the alley. My mother was walking in circles around the utility pole. Not at a leisurely pace like a stroll, but at a very fast pace, a quick walk. Or rather, she was going around and around and around at an incredibly fast speed, like a frantic run. The cheerful and kind expression she had shown us during the day was nowhere to be seen. Even from a distance, she looked like a raging demon, Hanya. As I stood there, stunned by the sheer horror, my younger sister urged, "Let's go back," and added, "That probably lasts for about 10 more minutes." I was terribly scared. Witnessing my mother's abnormal state, I finally began to realize the gravity of the situation. Asterisk, "You too, your family too," is finished. Asterisk. The woman's gruesome words were now repeating in my mind, returning to the house a step ahead of my younger sister. I felt along the wall to turn on the living room light. The switch should be around here. As I fumbled, the cornered plastic texture met my fingertips. Almost simultaneously, the bang sound echoed through the pitch dark. I thought, but it was already too late. I had pressed the wall switch. The living room was illuminated by white light. My eyes weren't used to the strong light, and I instinctively squinted. The woman in the white kimono was sitting on the table. Since her back was toward me, I couldn't see her face. There was no sense of reality, and I couldn't think clearly. It was already abnormal for a woman to be sitting Siza on the table, but to my eyes, which hadn't fully acclimated to the suddenly on indoor light, the entire living room space appeared bizarre. I could feel the clammy sweat breaking out all over my body, clinging to my clothes. I don't know how many minutes or seconds I stood there, but when my finger pressed the switch again with a patchin sound, the living room was swallowed by pitch-black darkness, and I couldn't see anything. And exactly then, I heard the gachari sound of the door opening from the entrance. My younger sister? However, my gaze was fixed on the living room, which was once again enveloped in darkness. I still felt the woman was on the table. Meanwhile, at the entrance, the gasa sound of someone taking off their shoes was followed by the gi sound, the characteristic creaking of the wooden floor when weight is put on it. I couldn't bring myself to turn toward the hallway. It should definitely be my younger sister, but I couldn't look in that direction. No, I somehow knew. It was a vague feeling, an intuition, but the person approaching me from behind was probably not my younger sister. An indescribably grotesque sensation seemed to intensify with the gi creaking. And in the middle of the pitch-black living room, near where the table was placed, the metallic can sound rang out. Just before losing consciousness, I distinctly felt my shoulder grabbed by the hand of the person right behind me. Incidentally, the next day, I was apparently sleeping in my older sister's room. She woke me up. Both my older sister and younger sister adamantly deny grabbing my shoulder in that pitch-black living room. Moreover, when my younger sister returned home, my mother had not yet returned. My younger sister confirmed this by checking not only her shoes but also her mother's bedroom. According to my younger sister, my mother's abnormal behavior is still ongoing. I've consulted a psychiatrist, and we've even had an exorcism done here. We've even been reported to the police once. I later heard that my younger sister had already heard the full story from my older sister and had been trying various things in secret from our father. But all efforts ended in vain. Seeing my mother's abnormal behavior, it was obvious that nothing had worked. And now I understood. It was the woman's fault. The sound at my older sister's place, my mother's terrifying appearance that night, it's all caused by that woman. Thinking that makes anger surge through me. But more than anger, I'm terribly afraid of that woman. I'm considering telling my father about it as soon as possible and moving out of the apartment.